Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Building a DevOps Culture in a Remote World. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate here at Microsoft. And Emily Freeman is your speaker today. Not only is she a great colleague and a friend, she's also the author of DevOps for Dummies. So more than qualified to be here for this topic. And take it away, Emily. We'll have some Q&A at the end. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Hello, I am thrilled to be here with you. It's not exactly how I thought we would meet, but I am beyond excited about some of the things we've cooked up to make this build extra special. Whenever I hear the words DevOps transformation, I imagine someone somewhere groaning and thinking, ugh, here we go again. We did Waterfall, we did Agile, we did Lean. There are countless books and ideas from tech celebrities of how we can develop software better, faster, and more reliably. And it's not that those methodologies were wrong or founded in bad ideas. Each were the next iteration of how we develop software, and each has left its mark on this industry. But when tested in production, those approaches to software development surfaced deep-seated frustrations, intellectual silos, and even fears. I think everyone in this session has stood through hour-long stand-ups in a room with a tall table and no chairs, or argued over whether a feature was an 8 or a 13. It was an 8, by the way, absolutely. We've attempted to follow outdated documentation that was never maintained, and witnessed the creation of Frankenstein-like microservices that I like to call macro services. We've probably written some too, but we're not going to talk about that because that's not fun. The point is, there are plenty of anti-patterns in our work, and you've probably experienced most of them. So why is DevOps any different from other ideas and transformations? Well, I think because it's about you, and that includes everyone. Where Agile focused on developers, DevOps centers the entire team. Devs, ops, PMs, designers, security, QA, and yes, even sales and marketing. It takes all of us to build and deploy great software for our customers. I'm Emily Freeman. I'm the author of DevOps for Dummies, and I'm a principal cloud advocate here at Microsoft. I am obsessed with helping technology organizations transform themselves by creating company cultures in which diverse, collaborative teams can thrive. I've worked in organizations with great culture. I've also worked in environments where you could literally feel the tension. In the former, I was challenged and inspired. I performed at a higher level, I thought creatively, I took risks, and I was happy. I left work smiling every day. In the latter, I was miserable. I mean, everyone was. I would start to plan lunch with my colleagues at 10 in the morning or find any excuse to escape the office. I didn't do great work, and my soul started to die. Hiring great engineers is just one piece of the puzzle. Allowing those engineers to thrive and to be the absolute best performers they can possibly be, well, that's an entirely different challenge, one I believe DevOps can solve. DevOps is a decade old. I can't believe it. It's a tween. And for the most part, it's been widely adopted by organizations across the tech industry. Now, if you're thinking, I've heard of DevOps, but I'm not exactly sure what it means, or, I don't think we're doing it right where I work, or maybe you're new to tech, and that's okay. Simply put, DevOps is an engineering culture of collaboration, ownership, and learning with the purpose of accelerating the software development lifecycle. DevOps is built on the foundation of Agile to focus on culture, process, and tools in that order, which is why this talk is focused on culture and the processes that support it, the two most important priorities of any DevOps organization. Now, before you ask, but what about the tools, Emily? Well, you're not wrong. Tools are critical to implementing DevOps, but they come last. When I ask people what's going wrong in their DevOps practice, they almost never say it's a tooling issue. And even when they do, it's more about how their team is utilizing that tool or product than the tool itself. If you put tools first, all you accomplish is automating and obfuscating the bad habits that already exist in your organization. Let's say, for example, that you want to release software more quickly. That's great. CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous delivery, seems like an awesome solution. And this is certainly where products like Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions can really come into play. But maybe your engineers aren't quite in the habit of writing tests to accompany new features or when they fix bugs. Without a robust test suite, a CI/CD pipeline, even if it's amazing, is just a fast trip to a bad time. You can just imagine in your own code bases and systems how chaotic it could become if you automated certain processes without first manually improving them. I've been picking dandelions out of my yard recently in a slow, endless battle. This tiny little flower that was so magical to me as a child has grown to be quite the nuisance in my adulthood. But the dandelion embodies a lesson. Weeds can grow in the worst soil. Clay, rock, sand, weeds find a way. But truly productive plants, the kind that give us life, they require a more hardy, rich environment. Farmers must care for the soil on their land, balance the acidity, add nutrients, till the dirt, rotate crops. It's hard work, but the effort bears fruit. DevOps is centered around a few core principles. You can think of these as the work you must do before you ever think of planting the seeds of tooling. It is in embodying and executing on these principles when your actions reflect the ideas that you begin to transform your organization. We're experiencing collective trauma right now in the world, and many companies have been forced to implement 100% remote work overnight. And I just want to acknowledge that that's not easy, and we're all figuring it out as we go. But there are some things that you can do now to build DevOps despite our distance. Empower your team to work with their peers and make independent decisions based on their expertise. Collaboration is foundational to DevOps practice, and that starts with trust. Trust is even harder to build in a remote environment. So create remote water cooler-like opportunities for colleagues to build rapport. Set up specific channels in your team's instance for people to casually chat about life, not work. And establish a lunch roulette routine where folks can grab a random lunch with a remote group of their peers. It's even better if managers or executives can actually join in occasionally because it allows them to create a really human connection with their teams. The bottom line is it is much easier to get through product and architecture disagreements if you trust the people with whom you work. Cross-functional teams in which members have complementary skill sets are ideal for establishing a culture where information is shared freely and reduces this sort of not my job attitude. One of the best ways to do this is to hire people who don't just have the technical skill set you need, but also have this sort of natural curiosity. These engineers often embody a dogged determination to figure it out, even if they're not sure how to go about it or which tool to use to solve a particular problem. Those people, those engineers, will grow to support each other over time and create a truly collaborative work environment. I want to be very clear about this. Failure is unavoidable. You cannot outthink or outsmart failure. It just happens. So you are much better off accepting that fact and practicing failure than you are to shift all your work toward avoiding it at all costs. But what does practicing failure actually look like? For one, it means acknowledging that we're all human beings. And sometimes, occasionally, the new guy deletes a production database. It happens. The question in that moment is not, why did we hire them? Instead, it's, why was someone able to independently delete a production database? Because that's a problem. And that's a process issue, not a human one. Communication is something sometimes undervalued in tech. We focus so much on that sort of raw engineering intelligence that we overlook the ability of some people to convey technical concepts to others clearly. But this soft skill is far from simple. Communication is a practiced skill, and without it, you will suffer reductions in speed, quality, and profitability. This also means being willing to be wrong, which always stings. I mean, it's uncomfortable. No one likes it. But you must be willing to accept feedback from your peers as well as from your customers. In a remote setting, this can be tricky. And the answer isn't overtaxing your teams with endless calls, because there is a fatigue and a cost to that. But do try to make time to communicate over video rather than just email and chat. It's a much more efficient and nuanced form of communication that conveys much more than just your words. One of the challenges DevOps faces is its implementation. It's much easier to conceptualize the values I just discussed than to actually inject them into your work environment. The reason implementation is hard is because we all work at different companies, and each of those companies has different people, resources, and constraints. I wish I could just hand you a checklist at the end of which you could declare DevOps victory and be done. Instead, I'm going to provide you strategies that you can then tailor to your unique environment. In DevOps for Dummies, I describe company culture as the unspoken expectations, behavior, and values of an organization. Culture is what tells your employees whether company leadership is open to new ideas. It informs an employee's decision whether to come forward with a problem or to sort of sweep it under the rug and cover their tracks. There are 3 main stages to building culture and designing your organization. First, you need to evaluate where you are currently. Then you need to ensure that leadership actually models the culture you want to build. And finally, you'll incentivize your values. The first step to building or renewing your organization's culture is simply evaluating its current health. This is especially important for older and larger companies who have a long history of institutional knowledge and habits, but it can be just as important for that scrappy startup. Even if you think you have great culture, I would encourage you to think about this and to look at it with a cynic's eye. Here are a few approaches I recommend. The first is simply to survey your employees. Ask. Now, you do need to ensure that the survey is anonymous, so employees are free to be honest without a fear of retaliation. Ask questions like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely would you be to leave for a 10% raise from another company? Or on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your direct supervisor's job performance? Observe interpersonal communication. You can learn a ton just from watching how the people in your company interact and work together. Is everyone engaged? Do folks assume positive intent? Are people spoken to with respect? Pay close attention to when engineers disagree. If they're really quick to escalate the situation with anger or name calling, it's a definite sign that people aren't able to express their frustrations in a more professional way. Finally, take a hard look at leadership. Company culture is set at the top and it flows down from there. If your CEO behaves like a jerk, chances are you have a culture of fear, disrespect, and competition. To create a DevOps culture, especially in a remote and often distributed working environment, it is critical that you lead by example and persuade others to join you. You absolutely cannot go it alone. A single hero engineer will do nothing but frustrate themselves and others. DevOps is a collaborative effort in every way. If you can appropriately model the benefits, measure the data, and persuade others, you will find your entire organization energized around new ideas and possibilities. Except, humans don't always like change. And most of the resistance to change that you'll likely encounter rests in 2 key areas. The first is simply past experience. Everyone comes to every job and every situation with years of successes and failures and disappointments and fears. If anyone in this session has ever been fired, you know how much that stings. I have been fired, and I remember being obsessed with how sad, even pathetic it was that I was walking home with my uneaten lunch. But the longer impact of that was that I was extremely intolerant of risk for a long time. You probably have colleagues in a similar situation, and it's important to have empathy for them. The other area of fear is simply uncertainty. Our brains often categorize opportunity as a threat rather than an opportunity. But no one is enemies in this. Your goal is to be kind and to persuade, never to force something onto any of your peers or employees. Ask questions. What are your colleagues struggling with right now? What's hard or labor intensive or stressful or irritating? And then offer concrete suggestions. We're engineers. We love evidence, but we also love it when someone has thought about how to solve a problem before they actually bring it up. Think through which challenge you want to tackle first and then next. It doesn't mean you're locked into a strategy, but thinking like that provides you a North Star that everyone can move toward together. Finally, encourage experimentation. You never know what brilliant idea might just work unless you give it a go. So keep experiments small to reduce risk and give people the freedom to try new approaches. Iterating and experimenting make DevOps something everyone is a part of, not something forced on engineers by leadership. Values are worthless if you don't communicate them to the team and you don't incentivize the behavior that supports them. I'm a big fan of positive reinforcement. Reward valuable behavior. If used poorly, negative reinforcement, I've seen it permanently damage morale. So you need to avoid that as much as you can. Evaluations can either be a time of constructive feedback and reflection, or a chaotic and panic-inducing period designed to instill fear and dread. Your team can either come out of them motivated or sort of defeated, and you get to decide. It turns out most humans aren't particularly motivated by cold, hard cash. Money is an extrinsic motivator, but many people are motivated by the intrinsic values with which they identify. Now, that doesn't mean you get to save a bunch of money on salaries. Don't get too excited. Your salaries must meet or surpass fair market value and should be equitable across everyone doing the same work. But get creative and ask your employees what motivates them. Sometimes it's as simple as words of affirmation and telling them that you value them and their work. Other times it's the freedom to work on fun projects or hack time. Freeing up 20% or so time for folks to play and experiment, I think, is even more important right now in this time. Everyone is stressed. There are new constraints placed on us. And if you're not careful, your most talented engineers will run themselves into the ground and burn out. Most engineers got into tech because they love creating and they love coding. So let them do that. Create opportunities for engineering to still be fun and exciting through this sort of challenging drudgery. That extra day of rest or engineering playfulness, it may never reap dividends for the company, but it is a clear sign that leadership cares more about their people than they do the bottom line. And that is an extremely powerful statement that may help you retain your most talented engineers. DevOps isn't a silver bullet, but it is a framework in which you can design company culture so that everyone can thrive and create a product that brings real value to your customers. I believe engineers who are proud of their work and their workplaces produce software that is better, faster, and more reliable. We have a unique opportunity in this moment to reset and reprioritize, not just about whether we'll ever return to offices or whether remote is productive, but about how we approach engineering, and perhaps more importantly, how we treat the people with whom we work. Thank you so much for joining me at Microsoft Build. I would love to take some questions and learn more about your individual DevOps journeys. But before we jump into QA, I do want to recommend Microsoft Learn. We have modules on evolving your DevOps practices, capturing feedback, monitoring data, as well as building and deploying your applications with Azure DevOps. If you're new to Azure, Learn is a fantastic resource. All of those modules in Learn will help you prepare for the AZ400 certification on Azure DevOps solutions. All right, I'm ready for questions. Brian, what do you got for me?
Greetings. Yes, a few great questions. We've had some great chats and some great questions. So thank you everyone who is participating. The first one really, there's been several questions around organizing teams, defining processes, making sure that teams are rewarded. And in general, how do you influence your leadership to embrace DevOps?
Yeah.
So if you want to just talk a little bit about that, people, process, and products, and how you actually influence those.
For sure. I think there were like 4 or 5 questions.
Yes, yeah, several actually, yes.
I would say, I think for me, the thing that popped out was how do you influence leadership? Because this comes up a lot. And I think about whenever you're sort of either trying to start up a DevOps transformation or trying to renew it, which I think is more the case now. Like usually people are doing DevOps in word only, and their actions don't really follow that sort of idea or thought process. If you can get buy-in from leadership and then a sort of groundswell of support from engineering, you have most of the support you need. At some point, the middle managers in there are in a really tough situation because they're sort of getting, they're just kind of squeezed from both sides. So we want to be empathetic to their position, but you definitely want to go high up and try and get buy-in from that. And I would say the best way to approach that is simply to pick a small sort of, you could even try like a service, like a small microservice, pull it out, and then really look at, okay, what's the situation it's in? How can we measure our baseline, whether that's performance or time, between deployments or whatever kind of measurement you want to use. Remember that any of them they're not going to be your sort of one litmus test. It's a lot of data points that kind of gives you an idea of where you're at. But if you can really start to look at that data and then show how your small improvements are increasing or decreasing that data as appropriate, that's how you can really get executive buy-in. Because it's like, if you're saving engineering time or money, they're going to be all for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that really, start small and have some successes that create the inroads. Absolutely. Now, the other question, we had a few variants on this question, is comparing GitHub's actions and the software platform in general to Azure DevOps. It's a little bit off topic for this session, but I was wondering if you wanted to take a shot at that one.
Did you not pay attention? This is not about tooling. No, it's a good question, and it's one that's being raised a lot right now. I would say that if you're already set up in Azure DevOps, it is an incredibly robust and powerful tool. And so I would continue down that train of thought. If you are brand new to this or in a little bit more of a greenfield situation where you're able to really start fresh, I would explore GitHub Actions and really look at it. I think of it as a little bit more lightweight. Obviously, we're still developing that and putting a lot of work into that. So it's going to grow and be an incredible tool. But some of it's just, how a tool can do the same, 2 tools can do the same thing, but sometimes it's just like an ease or comfort for the person. I really think some of that's at play with that. So play with both, experiment with both. You can always sandbox a project, and then let us know what you think. We would love your feedback.
Yeah. Tobias had a question as well, which is, I'll just read it out. In the past era, bringing muffins into the office was enough to break into the silos. How does that work with MS Teams? So I guess the question is, how do you create that human connection over remote connections?
For sure. No, and you're absolutely right. We can't, bribe our colleagues with muffins. I would like a muffin.
Those must have been some amazing muffins, by the way.
I know. Anyway. Now I'm like, because we're all baking now. We're all apparently sourdough bakers in this era. But no, I would say you have to be vulnerable, right? All of us trust people who are willing to share and be open. And so I think the more you can find opportunities to just really be with someone in a moment, maybe someone's having a bad time or a rough patch, and if you can say, hey, like, I've been there, this is what my story was like, you can really start to build that sort of emotional connection, and that will establish deep trust. But even without those sort of like openings, there's ways of just kind of chatting with someone, be like, hey, was thinking about you. How's it going? Just putting yourself out there a little bit goes a really long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question, what about DevOps versus SRE? What would be the considerations there in terms of work remote?
That's a great question. I think in some ways, so there's a couple of ways of thinking about this, and no one's going to be happy no matter what I say. No, the point is, like, I think you could view SRE as sort of the next iteration in a way. But the problem with that train of thought is SRE is a lot more focused on sort of the deployment, the maintenance of it, the actual, what I like to call abilities, availability, reliability, that type of thing. And so it misses some of these earlier areas of the software development lifecycle that I think we need to shift left. So, for example, a lot of times you don't think about security or identity or privacy until after the fact, after you sort of thought through these features. But if you can bring everyone to the table early on and really think about that before you ever write a single line of code, you are going to be at an advantage. Your product will be more robust, more reliable, more availability. There's also a sort of resume-driven development aspect of this, where 5 years ago, an engineer could add $40,000 to their salary if they put DevOps on their resume. And I do feel like we're entering that era with SRE. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you can get yourself $40,000, you do it. But there's a little bit of that element as well. Bottom line, I think they sort of prioritize different things, but they're definitely sort of sisters or brothers in this sort of environment.
Absolutely. Thanks.
And for one more question, and then we're going to wrap.
Great. Yeah. We're getting more of the culture questions, and really, I guess to sum them up, multiple questions. It's more of, how do you know when you're ready to implement DevOps as an organization?
That's a really good question. I think with most things in life, if you wait until you're ready, it's too late. So I would say just get started. You don't have to tackle your entire system all at once. You can start really small, think iteratively, think in a feedback loop where you're just kind of improving one small thing, measure that data, and improve the next small thing. Did it help? Did it hurt? Did it do nothing? Because that's another element of this. So just sort of pay attention and have those little experiments. You can start now. I also want to say, you don't have to be a manager or in a leadership position to be a leader. And you don't have to be a leader to be influential. And so if you really kind of take a passionate approach of this and you really think about how this can improve not just the company's efforts, but also your colleagues, I think we all want our colleagues to leave work smiling. And if we can do that, that will be incredibly powerful. So just go for it.
Yeah, that's great. Well,
Thank
wonderful.
you so much again for joining us.
Yes, thank you. That was great, wonderful talk. Thank you very much. And this will end the live portion. We will be on chat for a few more minutes as well. So thank you. That was great.